Welcome to an SFB Addict video. SFB Addict here, we're going to be going through a game that was played on Vassal for a campaign, and they're using the full-scale ships, not the cadet SSDs, so they need to use one of the various methods of the text SSDs to do their representations of the ships in the Vassal module. Now the module is capable of doing these SSDs, it's just that we're restricted by the copyright owner into not doing them. So we're using the Federation Heavy Cruiser to represent the ships that are being used, the destroyer and frigate, by editing down the boxes that are not there. Now, this right warp engine, for instance, is the center warp engine of the destroyer, and one of the things about using the SSDs in Vassal is that if you're not careful, if you just randomly right-click, it will damage a box. So what's happened here on this SSD is the player has accidentally damaged a Phaser 1 in a laboratory, and they've undone the damage on their number 5 and number 3 shield. This will get corrected later on as the video gets played back. But it does accurately represent the ship for the most part. The only difference is that on the destroyer, the Phaser 1s are left side, right side, and forward half. So here it's labeled as FA, LFL, RFR. So there's a note up here stating that they're left side, right side, and forward half kind of thing. And the ship on the right is edited down to be the improved frigate, and again the same thing has happened with the warp engine. There's only 6 boxes on each warp engine that are actually here, so half of these engines should be damaged, but everything else inside has been edited down. For instance, there's only 6 hull, so here on this improved frigate there's 3 center hull here and 3 center hull here, and that's how it's going to be played out. So those are the Federation ships, and then we have the Gorn ships, and these are the heavy cruiser. So these are an outline, and then we manually put in all the boxes to represent the systems with all the labels. That's why it's a little out of line kind of thing. That's because each one of these boxes were dragged in manually by the user to create the SSD that they want to use. It's sort of like drawing a ship with MS Paint on your own before using it for the battle kind of thing. But anyway, that's what this ship is. It's this cruiser right here. So all the boxes are in the right places kind of thing. So here we have 2 2x2 boxes to represent the 8 hull, where here on the actual SSD it's 2 boxes on top and then 6 boxes down below. It's the same number of boxes, just slightly different arrangement kind of thing, but it is an accurate representation of the ship. And then on the left side we have the light cruiser. Now, at the time that this game was played, the client only had the outline available for the heavy cruiser of each race. I've increased that, and I'm about to upload that to Vassal here in a little bit. But this is the light cruiser on the left. It's the appropriate number of boxes, etc. It's just inside the outline drawing of the cruiser. So those are the 2 ships that are being played. So we have the Federation destroyer and frigate on the top left, and we have the Gorn heavy cruiser and light cruiser in the bottom left, or sorry, bottom right. Top left, bottom right are the 2 positions. And I'll zoom out the map here, and they are about 30 hexes apart. Okay, now this is a log playback of the game, so I'm just going to be clicking through the next button here, and it'll reveal everything. So the Feds come in, and they're coming in speed 12, and the Gorn are coming in at speed 17, and we reveal the electronics as well. So the Gorn is coming in with 4 defensive and 3 defensive, whereas the Federation is coming in with 3 defensive, 1 cutting, and 2 defensive, 0 cutting. Now, interestingly, for this battle, the energy allocation for the Federation side on turn 1, they are paying for erratic maneuvering, and they're maximizing their ECM as much as they can, while still going about speed 12. And he's holding standard photons. He's decided to pay for the electronics rather than paying for holding of overloads. Now, the Gorn, on the other hand, is coming in holding 2 suicide shuttles on each ship, and they're coming in with their left side A tube, paying 6 points of power in the tube, so that would represent either an enveloper or a shotgun. And here, the Gorn is actually planning to use it as a shotgun, but there's a problem with that, and we'll get to that later. Okay, so let me just start clicking through here. So the Federation player here is just changing the icons for what he's using for his ships. He's putting the frigate on top. He's using the light cruiser counter for it rather than the 3 warp engined FFW to represent the frigate. And let's continue. So for most of the first turn, the ships simply just maneuver. The Gorn is going to fly up and around this point, and the Federation is going to fly down and around this point. So it's sort of like 2 half circles kind of thing. And not much really happens until he gets around impulse 25 thereabouts. So I'm just going to zip through here. I start checking the range. Now, those players should have been hitting the no action button on every impulse, but we were doing this over headsets so we could hear each other, so they devolved to basically either vocally saying no actions rather than hitting the button for making use of the video later kind of thing. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is how the Gorn and how the Federation have moved. If they were to go straight, they would probably be about here right now. So by side-slipping to the right, they've actually delayed their closing until later in the turn, and they've gone upward on the map. Now, in my opinion, that was probably a movement mistake on the Gorn's part, because if they had simply gone this direction, they could have done a couple side slips to make sure that their A tube is in arc, and then after that they could have turned left downward like that to bring their B tube to bear and turned off. And if need be, they could have just continued going straight towards the enemy. By doing the maneuvering upwards like this, they've actually delayed closing with the Federation player till near the end of the turn. And the problem with delaying until the end of the turn like that is that you're launching your plasmas near the end of the turn, which means the turn break where you start energy allocating for turn 2 isn't that far away. So that gives the Federation player the opportunity to change their speed and come in at a lower speed and possibly launch a Wild Weasel without having to emergency decelerate and that sort of thing. So the Gorn here probably would have been better off just going straight in, keeping their A tube directly towards the enemy, launching it, maybe turning off to bring their B tube to bear, or doing something different. Okay, so back to it, and the Federation player is doing the same thing on the mirror side. Instead of going straight in at a really slow speed, they're actually delaying their closing by going downward. And as a direct fire race, this just doesn't really make much sense. Well, Well, actually, sorry. Let me take that back. It does make sense. The Feds are kind of delaying the closure so that by the time the Gorn get there, they are closer to the end of the turn. So if that was their strategy, then that's the proper way to employ it. But that's not their strategy. Their strategy is actually to go high on electronics to try and force the plasmas to do proximity rolls, which can be a 50% reduction in their damage if they actually do hit. So it's kind of their movement also is counterintuitive to their tactics that they're actually trying to employ. So they probably would have been better off going straight in, kind of thing. With their slower speed and their higher electronics, that's kind of what they wanted to do, is go straight in. By delaying it till the end of the turn, it's not going along with what they were planning. Now, if they were planning on maintaining the high ECM, the erratic maneuvering, and the proximity roll chances, and in addition to that, making sure that the plasmas were launched near the end of the turn, then they're doing the right thing. But from what their tactics seem to have been, their movement doesn't seem to be matching what they were trying to plan. But anyway, let's continue. So we're up to impulse 24, so let me zoom in a little bit here. Let's see how much farther zoomed in I can get. Okay, there we go. Okay, so right around here we're going to start doing things, I think. Okay, so the Fed is side-slipping down a little bit. Okay, so at this point the Gorn is launching. And he's launching a G-torp, which is a 20, or an F-torp, which is a 20. But what he's trying to do here is he's actually launching shotguns, which is taking the last turn arming of the G-torp, doubling it, and instead of creating one G-torp, it creates two F-torps. And the F-torps are shorter range by about 5 hexes. So where the G-torp would still be 15 points, and F-torp is down to 1 point. So it's a strong plasma, but it degrades very fast, whereas the G is much longer lasting in comparison, at a higher strength. So 19 hexes, it's out to 5, whereas the F is degraded to 5 by 14. So it's an extra 5 movements, less degradation kind of thing. Okay, now at this point, I mentioned to the players, or I asked the players, that if I notice them doing something that's illegal against the rules, do they want me to intervene and state it? And they both say yes. So at this point, there is a little cheat sheet that I created for the technology. This is a campaign game playing in year 167, and the Gorn shotgun technology isn't available until year 168. So we point out to the Gorn that they can't have shotguns yet. And the Federation is making a little joke here about being terrified by all the plasma coming. And yes, where's the pile of crap counter? And well, I show them where the pile of crap counter is. It's the planet killer counter. Anyway, so we're in a little closer, so let's zoom in some more. I think we can be zooming out here in a minute. Okay, and at this point, the Gorn player, yeah, I'm going to zoom back out. The Gorn player swaps out his shotgun F-torps, the 4 of them, for 2 enveloped G-torps, because his arming was doubling the last turn of arming, which would have been the same thing for a shotgun as it is for an enveloper. So instead of just devolving down to a standard G, he chose to go with the enveloper. Now the Gorn was going to go to a standard G. It was the Federation player that said, no, if you want, you can have the envelopers, and that's what they ended up going with. And here the Federation is launching drones, speed 20. They are both ECM drones. Okay, and I'm going to zoom out the map again since the Gorn's going up a little bit. Sorry, at this point, that's when the Gorn is swapping out their plasmas. The shotguns for the envelopers. And then he puts on the plasma cards to represent that these are envelopers and who the targets are. So here the Gorn is opening the range. Now this, again, is probably a bit of a mistake on his part, considering what he does later. Actually, I'll just keep my mouth shut here and keep going. Well, actually, I'll say it. If he's increasing the range, waiting for the plasmas to hit first to evaluate whether or not the Federation is going to fire phasers at the plasma, or see how much damage they do, or if he's going to turn off and run away, then opening the range is okay, and then the Gorn could turn in later and come in behind the Federation. So it's sort of like an evaluation move kind of thing. So if that's what he was doing, then his side slipping to the right is the good thing to do. But, well, we'll see what happens here in a minute. So on impulse 32, everything moves. So the Fed are still pointing away from the Gorn. And the Gorn turns in. So at this point, his turning in completely negates his reason for going to the right. So instead of going up 1, 2, 3, he could have turned at this point and gone 1, 2, 3, and been down here in the very same hexes as his plasmas, being at range 1, 2, 3, 4, range 5 at the end of turn 1. Now, if the Gorn was planning on dropping speed and reinforcing his shields more for when he gets within range 8, then side slipping to the right would have been okay. If, on the other hand, the Gorn is trying to get as close to the Gorn, or as close to the Federation as possible, as quickly as possible, to overrun, to launch plasmas nearly point blank, and use his suicide shuttles point blank, he probably would have been better off not side-slipping to the right. Again, it depends on what his plan was versus what actually played out on the map. So the question really that the players need to decide on really when they're going to be playing at the battle is, am I planning on overrunning? Am I trying to get behind my opponent and then start chasing, kind of thing? So, for instance, if the Federation here had turned down then the Gordon's in the perfect position to get in behind the Federation as quickly as possible. And the Federation having FA photon torpedoes, that's a good place for the Gorn to be. And it kind of forces the Federation to either do an HET or come in and do speed 0, tack, 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 and then mid-turn speed change up kind of thing to bring his photons to bear. Okay. So the Gorn opens up with 2 phasers. Now, we were mentioning that the Federation player was playing such that he wanted to maximize his ECM, and this is where it is. After the Gorn and the Plasma and the Fed, their ECM levels are taken into effect. If there is a shift, a net ECM shift in favor for the Fed, that shift is added to a proximity roll. So when the Plasma is hit, if there's a shift of 2, that means a roll of a 1 to 4 is 100% damage, but a roll of a 5 and 6 gets shifted up to 7 and 8, and it's a 50% reduction. And if the Fed manages it and gets a shift to 3, and he rolls the 6, that would actually become a 9, where the Plasma only does 25% damage. So reducing a 20-point warhead down to a 5-point warhead, it's actually a valid strategy, if it works. It relies on having the electronics and the die roll work in your favor. So here we have the Gorn firing, and I've got that window open here somewhere. Let me find it. There we go. And he fires at the FFG. And hits the number 6 shield. And then we start energy allocation for turn 2. So the Federation's FA arc on their ships is out to here, and on the other ship is down this hex row. So the Gorn is outside of the FA for the Fed. So coming in this turn, if the Fed wants the Gorn inside FA, they need to turn into the Plasma, which is actually pretty good maneuvering for the Gorn, if that was his plan kind of thing. But again, I think the Gorn pretty much allocated for getting as close as possible, as quickly as possible kind of thing. The shotguns would actually have borne that out. But you notice here, at the end of turn 1, the Plasmas are 1, 2, 3, 4 away. If all those side slips hadn't happened, those Plasmas would have hit on turn 1. Okay, so we come in with the change of electronics. The Federation DD is coming in at speed 10, slowing down, and it's increasing its EW to 5. I think it was 4 the first turn. And he's got an ECM drone, so it's up to 8. And the Gorn ship is coming in at speed 24 for the light cruiser with 2 defensive. And it's coming in with 4 defensive, speed 17 for the Gorn CA. And the Federation frigate is coming in at speed 12 with 4 defensive, and then he's got the ECM drone giving him 7. So if we look at this, neither Gorn ship has cutting electronics. So this is 7 and this is 8, and both of these are a shift of 2. If you take away the ECM drone off of both of them, He's got 4, which is a shift to 2, and he's got 5, which is a shift to 2. So here, the ECM drones are pretty much a waste because the Gorn doesn't have any cutting. Now this is playing in year 167. The Federation and myself actually completely forgot that at this year, the Federation has speed 20 as general availability for his drones, so all of his drones could be speed 20, but what he's actually got in his racks is actually mostly speed 12s. Okay, first impulse, plasmas move.
No actions. No actions.
No actions.
And again, the Federation has paid for erratic maneuvering here, but has failed to declare it yet. And I will point out that he came in at speed 12. He could have come in at speed 0, tacked to bring his FA to bear, then increased with a mid-turn speed change on impulse 3 up to speed 4, launched a Wild Weasel, let the envelopers hit the Weasel, not taking damage on the ships, and then after, say, 16 impulses into the game, mid-turn speed changed up to about speed 14, and probably gotten close to the same number of movements as 10 and 12.
No actions.
And you'll notice that the Gorn here is still side-slipping away from the Fed. Here he's in this position, he's still trying to stay outside of the FA, but a single turn of the Fed and everything's straight up, and in here is within the FA, so it's pretty much wasted effort at this point. The Gorn is already outside the FA, and if the Fed turns, he's going to be in it regardless, so by moving away, he's just again delaying his closure rate. So he could have actually just gone straight down, which probably would have been better. He would have gotten the overrun faster. And if there is an EMR decel or a mid-turn speed change down on the Fed, the Gorn would rather be much closer in order to try and do a tractor anchor to prevent him from weaseling while he's still at a higher speed. Okay, Fed is side-slipping to the right, pretty much mirroring the Gorn's movements. Let me zoom out a little.
Open fire window.
Okay, and the Gorn fired phaser 1s at the ECM drone, defending the destroyer, and they destroyed the drone. But as I said, because of the lack of cutting electronics on the Gorn, it doesn't really help much. But there is the plasma with 3 cutting, so the speed 10 Fed has 9, minus 3 is 6, still a shift to 2. Now 5 minus 3 is 2, which is a shift of 1. So there, it's actually a good thing to kill the ECM drone, but we're going to get some erratic maneuvering declared here in a moment. Or did the Fed already do that? Let me scroll back up. I don't think I saw it. Yep, no declarations of erratic maneuvering on the Federation ships. And the plasmas are right on top of the destroyer.
No actions.
Okay. That was his roll for proximity shift. He needed a 6. So the Fed ends up taking 7 points of damage to every shield except for 2 of them, which takes 6.
Actions.
And the other plasma hits. This one is reduced to 30 points because of the movement, so it's 5 points per shield. And as you can see, the Fed ship pretty much now has no shields. And here he is fixing his accidental damage to his phasers. And the Gorn turns down. So at this point, the Gorn is committing to basically an overrun. And again, if he hadn't side-slipped to the right so much, he would have been there already. Because the plasmas were there, so he would have been like 1 or 2 hexes out from the plasmas. Although he would be within FA arc.
No actions.
No actions. Thinking.
The Fed DD has turned up.
Launching weapon.
Gorn is launching. Okay, so the Federation was erratic maneuvering here. I must have missed the declaration that he was under erratic. He must have said it verbally instead of saying it in the text. Yeah. So again, that was done verbally over voice chat rather than actually typing it into chat. So that's one of the drawbacks of playing the game back by the log is you don't get to hear what they're saying. I tried doing the video recording audio, but I didn't have it set up properly to both record my microphone and their microphones, so you could hear me and you could hear them, but they were like really low level. I tried bumping up the volume and it just didn't work out well. But anyway, I guess he was erratic maneuvering up until now.
Thinking.
And now he's coming out. And the Gorn is launching. He's placing a card.
No actions.
So there's the Gorn launches. These are standard 20-point torps.
No actions.
And the FFG is now turned up. The Gorn is now firmly within the FA arc of the Fed. Now, because of the speed of the Fed and the electronics and the erratic maneuvering kind of thing, the Gorn's probably glammed onto the fact that the Federation does not have overloads.
Launching weapon. I heard you, sir.
Now, this wasn't meant to be a launch, it was meant to be a shuttle launch, and he accidentally hit the HET. So, he just hit the wrong button, because plasma and drone launch is up here, shuttle launch is down here.
Shuttle bay operations.
Now he found it,
Shuttle bay operations.
and the Gorn's doing the same thing. So they're launching a bunch of shuttles. And here the Federation in a private chat window to me is telling me that this shuttle is a scatter pack, and the Gorn is telling me that 2 of these shuttles are suicide shuttles. And I comment to him that it probably would have been better to him to get to point blank range 0 or 1 and then launch them, because speed 6 shuttles aren't likely to catch up in speed to speed 12 and speed 10 units unless the Fed does something very stupid and silly and lets them catch them.
Open fire window.
Okay, and we have the Federation ship firing. And he's doing an alpha strike with his phaser 1s that arc and the photons. So phaser 3s are not firing, and his right side phaser 1s do not arc, so they are not firing. And the heavy cruiser is firing with 3 phaser 1s. So that's one of the front bubble phasers, and probably 2 of them on the wing. And the light cruiser is doing the same thing. The one on the wing and the 2 front. 7 photons, or 7 points to the DD from the heavy cruiser. 4 points from the light cruiser. 11 total. And these are shifted by ECM levels. And the Fed number 1 shield is down, or number 6 shield is down. And he's taking 6 internals. And here come the shots at the Gorn light cruiser with the photons. That's a miss, a hit, miss, miss, hit, and a miss. There are ECM shifts involved here. So he ends up doing 24 points of damage with standard photons. So that's basically the front shield down. And then these are phasers. 19 and 9 more, and in total that's 52 minus 2 battery from the Gorn. 24 shields, 26 internals. And let me pull up the Gorn. So this is the Federation damage. And now we have the Gorn applying his damage. So that's the light cruiser. A couple power hits, aft hull hits, impulse engine destroyed, completely neutered of all weapons except for a left side torpedo. Even lost the probe. So at this point the light cruiser is almost toothless except for a left side A tube, which next turn could be up as a fast loaded F tube. If fast loading is available yet. And yes, fast loading is available. And then we go to the next impulse. And the plasmas are coming in.
Open fire window.
Gorn fires again.
Thinking.
And here the Federation has waited just a little bit too long to declare Emer decel, I think. This is on impulse 9, which means impulse 12. He will be 0. So this is 9, 10, 11, 12. So unless the Fed can move twice in that amount of time, the plasma is going to hit. So badly timed Emer decel. And he may have misunderstood. He actually asked me by private chat how it worked. I said you declare Emer decel, you continue moving for the next 2 impulses, and then after that you're at speed 0, but he may not have caught on to that fact. These are players that haven't played in a long time kind of thing.
No actions.
Okay, the Gorn is firing. Misses.
Shuttle Bay operations.
This is an accidental hitting of the enter key for me. That's the speeds I had typed in on the chat line, so I remember which speeds to call in this long list of speeds.
No actions.
Operations.
And the Fed is rather anxious to launch that Weasel, and again he is informed that no, he can't launch it yet. He's got to wait until after movement on Impulse 12. At this point, the Gorn seems to be side-slipping to the right. At this point, I don't understand why, because all of the heavy weapons on the Fed have been fired. It's just the shuttles left and the right side phaser 1s. Yes, if the Fed turns up, the light cruiser is now outside of the phaser 1, so I can understand that one side slipping.
No actions.
No actions.
But the Gorn follows suit, and it's just a couple phaser 1s on each ship. It's not really that big of a danger. The Gorn CA could just completely overrun them. And the DD gets hit through the down shield with the first F-torp on Impulse 12. He's not speed 0 yet, so the plasma hits. Now we do the damage to the Fed. So as you can see, he's finally taking the first center warp engine hit. He's got lab, center warp, and a couple of miscellaneous systems left.
No actions.
And at this point, the Fed DD is speed 0, and he's done that. There is a plasma 1 hex away, so at this point he should be popping a Wild Weasel.
Open fire window.
There is, after all, 1 shuttle bay left, but he forgets it. The Gorn declares fire, and it's completely forgotten about. And the Gorn fires at the DD at range 3 through a down shield. Does 6 internals, and here are the 6. Loses all his photons, or most of his photons. Another center warp engine hit. And now the Weasel's gone. But it's too late, he couldn't have Weaseled anyway. Because he would have had to have Weaseled on Impulse 12 after movement before fire. Because that's the sequence of play. He would have needed to launch his Wild Weasel right here. And it just might have been a mental flub, but he gave up the ability to launch the Weasel, which would have protected the DD from this now incoming Plasma G. Plasma G hits. And he starts to apply it to the number 1. And then is told this internals. And he fixes his shield. And we start doing the internal damage. Now he's starting to lose his laboratories. He loses his right side phaser 1s through any weapon hits. and the ship is still there with most of its center warp still intact. He's got labs, and he's got center warp. No shielding, basically. So here we have the Gorn, after he turns, has one more Phaser 1 that now comes to bear. And does a little bit of center warp engine damage, takes it to the last laboratory. And if it were me, I probably just would have kept coming straight in with the Gorn, and then side slipped off to the down shield at the last minute kind of thing. On an impulse where the DD doesn't move, and would have fired the phasers point blank kind of thing. These shuttles, unless they're suicides, are of no danger to the Gorn, and the Gorn could have used his labs to identify the shuttles as seeking or not.
No actions.
And at this point, the Fed is just basically waiting for his scatter pack to release. And it just did. And at this point, they start negotiating what's going to happen with the rest of the game. Destroyer is going to get destroyed. The FFG is going to run away. The scatter pack drones at speed 12 are not going to catch the Gorn at all. And Gorn is going to be basically firing phasers at the destroyer through non-existent shields until it's destroyed, kind of thing. So at this point, the game is pretty much called. The Fed does some firing of phaser 3s at the shuttles that are in the same hex, damaging 2 separate shuttles where he should have actually fired at one shuttle with both of his shuttles. And this was something around 2 or 3 a.m. their time when the game finally ends. And the game concludes at this point. So as I was saying, the strategy for the Gorn seems to have been to just basically overrun the Fed. And that would have been more effective if he'd just gone straight and gone straight in, rather than side slipping to the right, up, and then turning down and in. It actually would have been easier for him to bring his torps to bear, just as long as he had kept the A tubes properly in line with his target until he launched. And then he could have started side slipping to the left to bring the big B tube to bear, or he could have even turned left downward to bring the B tubes to bear, depending on how things played out. So that's it for this game. The Gorn loses a the Federation loses a destroyer, which is pretty much payback for the last battle that happened, where the Gorn had one of their ships trashed. Actually, 2 of their ships were damaged, one rather heavily and one rather lightly. And the campaign continues on to the next year, which is year 168, where the Gorn does indeed get shotgun torpedoes. But with each battle, each player learns a few new things, blows a little bit more of the rust off, and they get more into the game. So that's it for this video. Have fun playing Starfleet Battles.